Welcome to Truth by Billie Beene. Today's date, April 23, 2025. Time in Texas, about 7 a.m. And thanks for hitting the like button. That helps my channel to grow. Some of the sources I'll use today: BPEARTHWATCH, BORZIKKMAN, Hal Turner, Space Weather, New York Prepper. Some of the things we'll cover: Sun, DNA, and the 144,000. President Trump, peace and war. And tariffs, 3,500%. Wow. So let's get started. I'm going to begin with space weather. So we have the Earth. We have the Sun. It's much larger than this. And we've been seeing geomagnetic storms. We had a G4. That was about 4 to 5 days ago. And on April 20, Sunday, we had a thinning of the Earth's electromagnetic shield, letting in protons. We had a radiation storm. And now we're getting some bizarre reports via space weather that there was, on April 20, Sunday, dancing tractors. And we had that same report in May of 2024 when we had a G5 geomagnetic storm. The dancing tractors come about because many modern tractors now have GPS applications on them. And in May, with the G5 storm, the GPS on the tractors was affected. There are now many reports coming in that April 20, this Sunday, there were similar events with farmers across the U.S. dancing tractors. However, on Sunday, there was no geomagnetic storm. I submit our electromagnetic shield is weakening and weakening, and thus anytime we have radiation, protons coming in, we're going to see more and more extreme events without a geomagnetic storm. Now, what we're experiencing from the sun is a huge hole in the sun, pushing out solar wind, and that's affecting the Earth. It's affecting human health. So we have this, a large hole on the sun where the Earth is, due to our weakening electromagnetic shield, receiving strong radiation and protons. We may have a geomagnetic storm level 2 on April 22nd. That would have been yesterday, with the KP index of 5. Likely to see auroras in Canada and the top tier of the U.S. And I believe we did see that happen yesterday. Now, BPEARTHWATCH has been putting out some interesting videos, and I agree with BP. He believes that this strong effect from the sun on the Earth is leading to changes in human DNA, and I would go along with that. Now, in the U.S., where we're having the strongest impact from both geomagnetic storms and the solar wind coming in, is up in the Michigan area and also the Appalachian Mountains, where there is a high incidence of metamorphic rock that absorbs more of the electric currents flowing to the Earth. We're now receiving thousands of reports of humans experiencing nausea, headaches, profound extreme effects. Now, BP believes that these sun changes coordinated with the weakening of the Earth's electromagnetic shield will bring about changes in human DNA. And I had a Facebook friend who brought some interesting information out. Yes, the sun will bring about changes in human DNA, and it's believed change our DNA. We now have 2 strands with 23,000 genes, and the prediction is that as we go through these changes on Earth from the sun, this is a cycle change that occurs according to Cliff High. The change rhythm is something like 1,200 years divided into 300 years divided into 75 years, impacting generations. And my Facebook friend says evidence is coming out that this cycle we're going through, which would take and last for several years, will change human DNA from 2-strand, 23,000 genes, to 12 strands and produce 144,000 genes. Now, I submit to you that Revelation talks about in the end times 144,000. For me personally, I always had a question in my mind. How could you have on Earth just this select group of 144,000 individuals out of billions of humans? But this new perspective would tend to indicate that the 144,000 will actually represent billions of humans whose DNA has been changed. So it's an exciting time to be alive. So that's going on. And now we'll talk about, we have some things going on. Yeah, we've had, in the U.S., we've had overnight, we had a fire in New Jersey around a nuclear power plant. Now, the nuclear power plant has been closed since 2018. However, the nuclear rods are still there. They're inside a concrete covering. So overnight in New Jersey, there was fires around this closed nuclear power plant, but it is still going on. And they closed some highways, evacuated some people. So that happened late last night. And it's coming out. So this started last night, April 22nd, the fires, that there was no red flag warning yesterday before these fires began. I'm sure as the day progresses, we'll get more information on what was the source for these fires and what is the current status. So it's good to be in prayer for the people of New Jersey. Also, we have this from the U.S. military is rushing to get in Washington, Idaho, and Nevada over the horizon radars needed to see if we have missiles incoming. So that's going on. And we have this from Hal Turner. The U.S. yesterday sent to the Middle East 2 E-3 Sentry planes. These are early warning planes, and they came out of Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma, and they are used to detect enemy missiles in times of battle. So 2 E-3 Sentry planes went to the Middle East yesterday. And now today, we have the U.S. military placing for the first time ever on U.S. soil over the horizon radars. Now in London, we had a meeting that was Ukraine, the U.S., Ukraine, and Europe to potentially bring about a peace agreement for Ukraine. Some of the key points were Russia would keep Crimea, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson. Ukraine would never join NATO, and the U.S. would lift sanctions on Russia. So that was some of the key points. It's coming out now from BORZIKKMAN that this was rejected by Ukraine and Europe, and it's being put forth by Alistair Crook, that as a former UK diplomat, that Ukraine and Europe want to continue the war so they can extract money from their populations, much of it to go into their personal pockets. So that's going on. And also it would include a ceasefire along the current front line. But that, as we understand, being rejected by Ukraine and Europe. Now, President Trump has said this. This is his last go-round. So we had retired General Keith Kellogg in London today to talk to Ukraine and Europe, and then President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, after this meeting was to go to Russia to discuss the results of that meeting. Now, President Trump has said this is his last go-round, his last putting forth, trying to negotiate a peace between Ukraine and Russia. If they reject it, then the U.S. is out. And we would hope that means no more money, no more weapons, no more intel to Ukraine. We would also hope that means President Trump withdraws our troops from Europe and our ammo and our equipment and brings them back to the homeland to defend us. And you say, well, what do we have to defend ourselves against? I submit that would be the CCP and the cartels. Now, I believe we can take as a sign that the U.S. military is now putting over the horizon radars inside the homeland. So that's going on. President Trump said this is the final U.S. orchestrated peace negotiation between Ukraine and Russia. If they decline it, then so be it. They're on their own. So that's going on. And we have this from DURAN, talking about the Middle East. Russia has signed, and the agreement has been ratified by the Russian government, an alliance between Russia and Iran, economic and defense and energy. And it's being put forth for President Trump then to negotiate peace with Iran. that Russia would be the guarantor of Iran's enriched uranium. In other words, Russia would be in possession of Iran's enriched uranium and would guarantee that Iran was not producing more enriched uranium to produce nuclear weapons. So that's going on. And now we have this. We have from DURAN. So last week we had President Trump's Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is also in the current process of downsizing the U.S. State Department, including closing 132 consulates and embassies on a global basis and reducing the number of employees at the State Department by 15%. So we had Marco Rubio at a recent meeting that also part of the discussion, a negotiation regarding Ukraine and Russia, regarding, and this was put forth by the U.S., that the U.S. inside Ukraine would manage the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and that the plan to be put forth in London, that took meeting yesterday, was 95% the Kellogg plan. So that's going on. And we have this. We have from Hal Turner. Okay, so now we're seeing some things go on. We have China. We've got Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia. We've got Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines. Now, with the sun activity, we saw on yesterday about 6 strong earthquakes. One was a 6.6, downsized to a 5.2 by USGS. I submit, I believe many of our earthquakes are most likely 1 notch above what the USGS puts them out as. But many of these earthquakes, especially around Japan, were in this area. So we see seismic activity in the Asian area. And we're seeing this. China is retaliating against the U.S. for the tariffs. And China has stopped buying U.S. Boeing planes, stopped buying from the U.S. LNG and oil, and has stopped selling to the U.S. rare earth minerals. But what's coming out is that in China, in their factories, the U.S. equals 25% of their exports, and the Chinese factories operate on a month-to-month basis. And just based on this short time that the U.S. has put these tariffs in place, some factories envision closing by the end of April. So that's going on. And it turns out that this is definitely impacting China's economy. So that's going on. Now, another point is that 80% of U.S. pharma is made in China, medicines. We do see many big pharma companies now moving to the U.S. and planning to build and begin producing here. So that might be a problem for us with regard to medicines for a short period of time. We have this from Alex CHRISTEFEROU relating to an article by Politico that President Trump wants, wants to talk directly to President Xi and does not want to use back channels, and that China warns any country that engages in a trade war against China that China will retaliate. So we have that going on. But apparently inside China, there's already impacts. And we have this. We have also in these trade wars, we have regarding solar panels. President Trump is putting forth new tariffs. On Cambodia, it's 3,500% on solar panels. And Malaysia, Cambodia, Vietnam, plus Thailand. President Trump is putting high tariffs up to 3,500% on solar panels because these four nations have been dumping on the U.S. market. What that means is they've been producing solar panels at a very cheap rate, much lower than the U.S. can produce them, and they dump them on the U.S. market, thus taking business away from U.S. companies producing solar panels. So President Trump is pushing back with these incredibly high tariffs. So way to go, President Trump. Make America great again. We have gold going up to a high yesterday of $3,451.40. That's a record. We had Bitcoin going up to $90,000. So that's going on. And we have this. So we have, 3,500% tariffs on the solar panels. And we have this from New York Prepper. So a few days ago, we had 34 EAMs, emergency alert messages, on the U.S. nuclear radio channel. And this new information, the U.S. sends a Sentinel plane. This gives information directly to the President or the Secretary of Defense along the border with North Korea and South Korea. Now, what's going on? We can see a build-up here. We have China, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines. Now, on the island of Japan, we have 23 U.S. military bases. We have, in the last 7 days, sent 4 B-52 strategic bombers to Japan. First time since World War II. And now, for the first time in history, we have sent to the Philippines mobile missile launchers. So we see the U.S. possibly setting up for something in the area around China. So that's going on. And we have this. From Zero Hedge. Tariffs hit Chinese economy and is dramatically impacting the Chinese economy. And we understand that some of its factories may close by the end of April. Now, President Trump has exempted for 30 days certain things from China. Electricity parts and devices, especially used by Apple, NVIDIA, and Microsoft. So that's going on. So I believe it's good to pray for America, President Trump, the U.S. military, and world peace. I love you, and I'll see you soon.